The sentence I heard that afternoon saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. At the time, I did not know it. I thought I was only going back for my coat. My name is Lauren Bennett. I was 34 years old, 1 week away from my wedding, and completely certain I was about to marry the right man. Ryan Bennett and I had been together for nearly 3 years. We had chosen a beautiful venue overlooking a river just outside Nashville. The invitations had been mailed. The flowers were ordered. Family members were flying in from several states away. Every detail seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Looking back now, I realize perfection can be dangerous. Sometimes it keeps you from asking the questions you should ask. That Saturday afternoon, I drove to Diane Bennett's house carrying a homemade lemon cake. Diane was Ryan's mother. She was 68 years old, elegant, organized, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Everyone loved her. She had spent months helping with wedding plans. She recommended vendors, reviewed menus, and even helped coordinate guest seating. I genuinely believed she cared about me. The visit itself was pleasant. We sat in her sunroom drinking iced tea while discussing final preparations. Diane complimented the wedding decorations. She told me how excited she was to welcome me into the family. At one point, she even reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Ryan is lucky to have you," she said warmly. I remember smiling. Hearing those words from my future mother-in-law felt reassuring. After about an hour, I left her house feeling grateful. The weather was beautiful. The sky was clear. Country music played softly through my car speakers as I drove away. I had gone nearly 10 minutes down the road when I realized my coat was missing. It was a light beige coat I loved. I immediately remembered hanging it near Diane's front door. Without thinking, I turned the car around. That simple decision changed everything. When I pulled back into Diane's driveway, I noticed her front door was slightly open. I assumed she was still cleaning up after our visit. I walked toward the entrance quietly, planning to grab my coat and leave. Then I heard her voice. She was talking on the phone. At first, I paid no attention. But as I reached for the door handle, a sentence drifted through the opening. "She still does not know why Ryan really proposed." I froze. Every muscle in my body seemed to stop moving. For a moment, I honestly wondered whether I had misheard her. My heart began pounding. Diane continued speaking. Her voice sounded calm, almost casual. "No, everything is on schedule," she said. "1 more week, and it will all be settled." I could not hear the person on the other end. I only heard Diane. "Trust me," she said with a small laugh. "Lauren has no idea." My stomach tightened. Suddenly, the warm conversation we had shared less than 15 minutes earlier felt completely different. I stood there motionless beside the doorway, afraid to breathe too loudly. Questions flooded my mind. What did she mean by why Ryan really proposed? What exactly was supposed to be settled? And why did she sound so confident that I knew nothing about it? Then I heard footsteps moving closer from inside the house. Panic snapped me back to reality. I stepped away from the door and hurried toward my car before anyone could see me. I left my coat behind. As I drove away for the second time, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. 1 week earlier, I had been counting down the days until my wedding. Now, for the first time, I was wondering whether I truly knew the man I was about to marry at all. The entire drive home felt surreal. Traffic lights changed. Cars passed by. People walked their dogs along quiet sidewalks. Everything looked normal, yet nothing felt normal anymore. Diane's words repeated in my mind over and over. She still does not know why Ryan really proposed. I must have replayed that sentence 100 times before I pulled into my driveway. That evening, Ryan called as he always did. We usually spoke for at least 30 minutes every night. Wedding plans, work stories, future dreams. Small things that couples talk about when they are building a life together. This time, I listened differently. Every answer seemed to carry new weight. "How was your day?" he asked. "Good," I replied. "I stopped by your mother's house." There was a brief pause. Not long enough to seem suspicious. Just long enough for me to notice. "Oh," he said. "How is she doing?" "She seemed great." Technically, that was true. I did not mention the second visit. I did not mention the conversation I overheard. Instead, I asked questions. Questions I had never thought to ask before. "Do you remember when you decided you wanted to marry me?" I said casually. Ryan laughed softly. "That is a random question. Humor me." Honestly, probably during our trip to Colorado. His answer sounded natural, convincing. Yet for some reason, it no longer reassured me. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began reviewing things I had ignored for months. Nothing dramatic. Just ordinary details. Wedding contracts. Budget spreadsheets. Joint planning documents. At first, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed something strange. Several large wedding deposits had been paid far earlier than I remembered discussing. I checked the dates again. One deposit had been made nearly 8 months ago. Another almost 7 months ago. That confused me because Ryan and I had not officially chosen our venue until 6 months ago. I stared at the numbers. Maybe it was an administrative error. Maybe I misunderstood the paperwork. Yet the timing bothered me. The next morning, I met my friend Emma Reed for coffee. Emma had known me since college. If anyone could tell whether I was overreacting, it was her. I told her everything. The forgotten coat. The overheard conversation. The strange payment dates. Emma listened carefully without interrupting. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "Lauren," she said gently, "if you had not heard that conversation, would these details seem suspicious?" I thought about it. Probably not. Then do not jump to conclusions. I nodded. It was reasonable advice. Unfortunately, my instincts refused to settle down. That afternoon, I reviewed more financial documents related to the wedding. Most looked ordinary. Then I found something unexpected. One of the deposits had originated from an account that did not belong to me or Ryan. The account name itself meant nothing to me. It appeared to be connected to a financial consulting firm. I stared at the screen. Why would a consulting firm be involved in paying for wedding expenses? The amount was not small either. It covered nearly half the venue cost. My heart began beating faster. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe Ryan had borrowed money. Maybe Diane had arranged something privately. Yet as I sat there studying the records, one uncomfortable thought refused to leave. If everything about this wedding was honest, why did so many details seem hidden? For the next 2 days, I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. People borrow money. Families help pay for weddings. Financial records can be confusing. Every time doubt appeared, I tried to replace it with logic. The problem was that the facts kept moving in the opposite direction. On Tuesday evening, Ryan came over for dinner. We sat on my back patio while the sun disappeared behind the trees. Normally those moments felt easy, comfortable. This time I found myself studying him. Not because I wanted to catch him in a lie, but because I was trying to understand whether the man I loved was hiding something from me or whether he was being kept in the dark too. Halfway through dinner, I decided to ask a simple question. "How are the wedding payments looking?" Ryan smiled. "Better than expected." "What does that mean?" "Some expenses ended up being lower than we budgeted." I nearly asked about the consulting firm right then. Instead, I waited. "That is good," I said. "Less stress." "Exactly." He sounded sincere. That was what made everything so confusing. Nothing about his behavior felt calculated. If anything, he seemed relaxed, relieved, almost grateful. Later that night, after he left, I logged into the shared planning portal we had both used for months. I had already reviewed most of the documents, but this time I focused on older files. Buried inside archived folders, I found invoices dating back nearly a year. My heart skipped. Ryan and I had not even been engaged a year ago. Yet several wedding-related consultations had already been scheduled. Venue discussions, event planning meetings, preliminary guest list reviews. I stared at the dates in disbelief. How could wedding planning begin before a proposal? The next morning, I called the venue under the pretense of confirming final details. The coordinator was friendly and professional. During the conversation, I casually mentioned how exciting it had been watching the planning process unfold over the last several months. "Actually," she said cheerfully, "your event has been in development much longer than that." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing unusual. We have notes going back almost 11 months. 11 months. Nearly a full year." After ending the call, I sat motionless at my desk. Ryan proposed 8 months ago. According to the venue, planning had started 3 months before that. The timeline made no sense. Then another memory surfaced. About a year ago, Ryan had gone through what he described as a difficult period at work. He seemed distracted for months. Several times he canceled weekend trips because of what he called financial pressures. At the time, I never questioned him. Now those memories felt different. That afternoon, I searched public business records connected to the consulting firm listed on the payment documents. Most of the information was ordinary. Then I noticed one name listed among previous advisors. Diane Bennett. My future mother-in-law was not just helping with the wedding. She had a documented connection to the same firm that had quietly paid a large portion of it. I stared at the screen as a cold feeling settled in my chest. Then my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, only a photograph of Ryan leaving a downtown office building months before his proposal. And standing beside him was Diane. For several minutes, I stared at the photograph on my phone. The image itself was ordinary. Ryan and Diane were simply walking out of a downtown office building. Yet nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. The timestamp showed it had been taken almost 10 months earlier, long before Ryan proposed, long before wedding invitations, long before any of the plans I thought we had created together. I enlarged the image and studied the building directory visible near the entrance. Most of the names meant nothing to me, but one stood out immediately. It matched the consulting firm connected to the wedding payments. My pulse quickened. Whoever had sent the photograph wanted me to see that detail. The question was why. I considered calling Ryan immediately. Instead, I forced myself to slow down. Every time I reacted emotionally, I risked making assumptions. I needed facts. The next morning, I drove to meet Melissa Grant. Melissa was Ryan's cousin. We had always gotten along well, and unlike many people in the family, she tended to speak honestly even when conversations became uncomfortable. We met at a small cafe near downtown. At first, we discussed wedding plans and family updates. Then I carefully shifted the conversation. How did Diane feel when Ryan and I started dating? Melissa nearly dropped her coffee cup. The reaction was subtle, but I noticed it instantly. "Why are you asking that?" she said. "Just curious." Melissa looked away. Honestly, she was not thrilled at first. That answer surprised me. Diane had always acted supportive. "Not thrilled?" I asked. Melissa hesitated. She thought you and Ryan came from very different financial backgrounds. I felt my stomach tighten. Financial backgrounds. Lauren, I probably should not be talking about this. The moment people say that, they almost always continue talking. Diane worried Ryan needed stability. Melissa said quietly. She was always focused on money. I sat silently. How focused? Melissa sighed. A few years ago, she practically treated every major life decision like a business transaction. Her words echoed in my mind long after we left the cafe. That afternoon, I returned home and reviewed more records. This time I focused on my own finances. Nothing unusual appeared at first. Then I remembered something Ryan had suggested shortly after our engagement. He had encouraged me to meet with a financial advisor recommended by Diane. At the time, it seemed thoughtful, practical. We were planning a future together. I opened old emails and found the recommendation. The advisor's contact information looked familiar. Too familiar. After several minutes of searching, I found the connection. The advisor worked for the same consulting firm that appeared on the wedding payments. The same firm connected to Diane. The same firm connected to the photograph. Suddenly a pattern began emerging. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. Late that evening, another message arrived from the unknown number. This time there was no photograph, only a screenshot of an email header. The sender name was partially hidden, but the date was visible. 11 months earlier. The subject line stopped me cold. Strategic timeline before proposal. Beneath it appeared a short preview sentence. We need to ensure everything is in place before she becomes suspicious. I barely slept that night. The screenshot remained open on my laptop long after midnight. Strategic timeline before proposal. We need to ensure everything is in place before she becomes suspicious. Those words felt impossible to ignore. They suggested planning, coordination, intent. Yet I still lacked the one thing that mattered most. Proof. The next morning, I decided to stop chasing anonymous messages and start looking for answers in places I could verify myself. I called the consulting firm, not to accuse anyone, not to confront anyone, simply to ask a question. I introduced myself as a client reviewing personal financial records and requested information about past consultations connected to my name. The representative was polite but careful. Privacy policies prevented her from discussing specifics. Before ending the call, however, she mentioned something unexpected. According to our records, your profile was first reviewed approximately 11 months ago. My pulse quickened. Reviewed by whom? I am sorry. I cannot provide names. 11 months again. The same timeline. The same period before Ryan's proposal. After hanging up, I opened old emails and calendar entries from that year. At first, I found nothing unusual. Then I discovered an appointment I barely remembered. Diane had invited me to lunch and introduced me to a financial advisor she described as a trusted professional. At the time, I thought she was simply helping me prepare for married life. Looking back, the meeting felt very different. I remembered the questions. They had not focused on wedding plans or budgeting. They focused on my assets, my savings, my investments, my property. I had answered casually because I trusted her. The realization left me feeling sick. Later that afternoon, Ryan stopped by unexpectedly. The moment I opened the door, I could tell something was wrong. "We need to talk," he said. We sat in the living room. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and sighed. "Have you been investigating something?" My heart skipped. "Why would you ask that?" "Because people have been calling." He rubbed his forehead. "The venue, the consulting firm, even my mother." I stared at him. "Your mother knows?" "She says you are asking strange questions." I almost laughed. Strange questions? As if wanting to understand my own future was unreasonable. "Ryan," I said carefully, "when exactly did you decide to propose?" He looked confused. "What does that have to do with anything? Please answer." He leaned back and crossed his arms. "About 8 months ago." "Are you sure?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean?" I watched his face carefully. For the first time, uncertainty appeared. Not guilt. Uncertainty. Then he said something that changed everything. "Actually, the ring was purchased earlier than that." My stomach tightened. "How much earlier?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe 3 months earlier." 3 months. Exactly enough time to place the purchase within the same mysterious timeline that kept appearing everywhere else. Ryan frowned. "Lauren, why are you asking these questions?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another message from the unknown sender. This time it contained a single attachment. An email exchange. And for the first time, one of the names was fully visible. Diane Bennett. My hands shook as I opened the attachment. Ryan was still sitting across from me in the living room, completely unaware of what had just arrived. For a moment, I considered hiding it until I could review it alone. Then I realized I was tired of secrets. If this situation involved both of us, then both of us deserved to see the truth. "Ryan," I said quietly, turning the phone toward him, "I think you need to read this." He leaned forward. The email chain was several pages long. Most of the text had been partially blurred, but enough remained visible to understand the conversation. Diane Bennett's name appeared repeatedly. So did the name of a senior advisor at the consulting firm. The dates stretched back nearly a year. Ryan read silently for several minutes. His expression gradually changed from confusion to disbelief. Finally, he looked up. "This cannot be real." "I thought the same thing," I replied. "But everything keeps pointing back to the same timeline." He returned to reading. One sentence near the middle of the exchange remained completely visible. "Asset alignment should be completed before engagement discussions move forward." Ryan stared at those words. "What does that even mean?" he asked. I did not answer because I already suspected the answer. Asset alignment sounded less like a relationship and more like a transaction. Another visible sentence appeared farther down the page. Diane had written it herself. "Lauren's financial position makes long-term stability possible." The room fell silent. Ryan looked physically uncomfortable. "I have never seen this before," he said. For the first time since this started, I believed him completely. His reaction did not feel rehearsed. It felt genuine. "Then why would your mother be involved in conversations like this?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "I do not know." The following morning, Ryan called Diane and asked to meet. He insisted that I attend. Surprisingly, she agreed immediately. That afternoon, we arrived at her house together. Diane greeted us with the same warm smile she always wore, but it vanished the moment she saw the documents in Ryan's hands. "What is this?" she asked. Ryan placed the printed emails on the dining room table. "I think you should tell us." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Diane slowly sat down. The confidence I had always associated with her seemed diminished. "Where did you get these?" she asked. "That is not the important question anymore," Ryan replied. "Are they real?" Diane stared at the papers. "Some of them are." My heart sank. Not because she admitted it. Because she admitted it so easily. Ryan looked stunned. "Mom, what were you doing?" Diane exhaled heavily. "Trying to protect your future." "By discussing Lauren's finances with consultants?" I asked. "By planning things before we were even engaged?" Diane closed her eyes briefly. "You are misunderstanding." But the explanation that followed only raised more questions. She admitted consulting advisors. She admitted discussing long-term financial security. She admitted helping coordinate certain decisions before the proposal. Yet she continued insisting everything had been done for Ryan's benefit. Then Ryan asked a question neither of us had considered before. Who else was involved? Diane immediately looked away. That reaction lasted less than a second. It was enough. Someone else existed. Someone important. And judging by Diane's expression, revealing that person's name was the one thing she feared most. The drive home from Diane's house was silent. Ryan barely spoke. I could tell his mind was racing through every conversation he had ever had with his mother. Mine was doing the same. One question kept repeating itself. Who else was involved? Diane's reaction had been too immediate, too emotional. She was not afraid of the emails anymore. She was afraid of a person. The following morning, I woke up to another message from the unknown sender. By now, I no longer dismissed the messages as random. Whoever was sending them clearly knew details that nobody outside this situation should have known. This time there was no attachment. Only a single sentence. Ask Charles Ford about the trust review meeting. I stared at the screen. Charles Ford. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. He was a retired attorney who had handled estate planning for several families in the area, including some of Diane's longtime friends. After several phone calls, I managed to reach him. To my surprise, he agreed to meet that afternoon. Ryan insisted on coming with me. Charles was 71 years old and lived in a quiet brick home outside the city. The moment he saw our names, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. I had a feeling this conversation would happen someday, he said. My heart immediately began beating faster. We sat in his study surrounded by shelves filled with legal books and framed family photographs. Ryan placed copies of the emails on the desk. Charles reviewed them quietly. Finally, he nodded. I was hoping these discussions would never go this far. What discussions? Ryan asked. Charles folded his hands together. Several years ago, your mother became extremely concerned about your financial future. Ryan frowned. Concerned enough to plan my engagement? Charles looked uncomfortable. Not exactly. Then he paused. At least not in the beginning. That answer changed everything. Charles explained that Ryan's business had experienced serious financial problems before I entered his life. Diane had spent years worrying about stability, debt, and long-term security. At first, she sought advice from financial consultants. Then those discussions became more aggressive, more strategic, more focused on creating a solution. A solution? I asked quietly. Charles nodded. You. The room fell silent. Ryan stared at him. What does that mean? Charles sighed heavily. Lauren, you were successful, financially responsible. You owned property. You had investments. Diane believed a marriage between the two of you would solve many of Ryan's future concerns. My stomach tightened. Are you saying she viewed me as a financial plan? I am saying she stopped separating relationships from financial outcomes. The distinction barely mattered. Then Ryan asked the question that had haunted us since yesterday. Who else was involved? Charles hesitated longer this time. Finally, he opened a folder and removed a single document. At the top appeared the name of the consulting firm. Beneath it was a list of participants from a planning meeting held 11 months before my proposal. Diane Bennett, 2 financial advisors, and one final name, Ryan Bennett. I felt the room spin. Ryan grabbed the paper and stared at it. His face turned pale. That is impossible, he whispered. I have never seen this meeting record before. Yet there it was. His name printed clearly alongside everyone else's. And for the first time since this began, I realized the truth might be far more complicated than either of us wanted to believe. For several minutes after leaving Charles Ford's house, neither Ryan nor I spoke. The document rested between us on the center console, like something fragile and dangerous. I kept staring at his name, Ryan Bennett, printed clearly beneath the meeting record. No matter how many times I looked at it, the result remained the same. His name was there, yet the expression on his face told a different story. He looked shaken, confused, almost betrayed himself. Finally, he pulled into an empty parking lot overlooking the river and turned off the engine. Lauren, he said quietly, I swear I have never seen that document. I believed he meant it. The problem was that belief no longer felt sufficient. Then how did your name end up there? I asked. Ryan rubbed his eyes. I do not know. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then something occurred to him. He reached for his phone and opened old emails. There was a period when my mother handled several meetings for me, he said. I was dealing with business problems. She kept telling me she was helping organize financial advice. He scrolled through messages. I trusted her. 10 minutes later, he found one. An email from nearly a year earlier. Diane had forwarded a meeting invitation and told him she would attend on his behalf because he was traveling. My heart began racing. Could that be the meeting? Ryan nodded slowly. The date matches. Suddenly, the document looked different. His name might have appeared on the record, but that did not necessarily mean he participated. It meant someone may have represented him. That evening, Ryan called Diane and asked her to meet us the next day. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the determination underneath. There would be no more assumptions. No more half answers. The meeting took place inside Diane's dining room. The same room where she had smiled at me only days earlier. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Ryan placed every document on the table. The emails, the payment records, the meeting record from Charles. Diane stared at them for several seconds before looking away. "Mom," Ryan said, "I need the truth." Diane remained silent. "Did you attend that meeting for me?" he asked. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." "Did you discuss Lauren's finances?" Another pause, then another nod. My stomach tightened. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. "Why?" Diane's voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked. Tears appeared in her eyes. "Afraid you would lose everything." What followed was not the explanation I expected. Diane admitted that years earlier Ryan's business problems had frightened her more than she ever admitted. She became obsessed with protecting his future. She consulted advisors. She sought strategies. She convinced herself she was helping. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing people as people and started seeing situations as solutions. "Lauren was never supposed to be hurt," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting my son." I listened carefully. Part of me understood her fear. Another part could not ignore the damage it caused. Then Ryan asked the question that mattered most. "Did you ever tell me to propose?" Diane immediately looked up. "No." "Did you ever tell me to date Lauren because of money?" "No." Her answer came without hesitation. For the first time all week, absolute certainty entered the room. Diane had manipulated circumstances. She had interfered. She had crossed boundaries. But she had not created the relationship itself. Ryan looked at me. I looked back at him. Yet one decision still remained. The wedding was only 3 days away. And for the first time, I had to decide whether trust could survive everything I had learned. That night, I sat alone on my back porch long after the sun disappeared. The wedding was 3 days away. For months, I had imagined exactly how those days would feel. Excitement, anticipation, joy. Instead, I found myself surrounded by silence, replaying every conversation, every discovery, and every uncomfortable truth that had surfaced since the afternoon I forgot my coat. The hardest realization was not that Diane had interfered. It was that trust, once shaken, cannot simply be restored because someone apologizes. It requires time. It requires honesty. Most of all, it requires certainty. And certainty was the one thing I no longer had. The next morning, Ryan came to my house. He looked exhausted. Neither of us bothered pretending everything was normal. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where we had shared countless meals and future plans. Finally, he spoke. "I love you, Lauren." Tears immediately filled my eyes because I believed him. That had never been the problem. "I know," I said quietly. "Then do not let my mother's mistakes destroy what we have." I looked down at my hands. "Ryan, your mother did not destroy this." He frowned. "Then what did?" I took a deep breath. "The fact that I no longer know where the influence ends and where our decisions begin." The sadness in his face nearly broke my heart. We talked for more than 2 hours. No accusations. No arguments. Just honesty. By the end of the conversation, we both understood the same thing. Neither of us was ready to walk into a marriage carrying questions that still needed answers. That afternoon, we made the most difficult decision of our lives. The wedding would not happen. Family members were notified. Vendors were contacted. Reservations were canceled. Some people were shocked. Others were disappointed. A few became angry. None of that mattered. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not happy. Not relieved. Simply calm. Several weeks later, Ryan and I continued talking. Without wedding deadlines. Without pressure. Without pretending. We attended counseling together. We discussed boundaries. We discussed trust. We discussed the future honestly for the first time. Diane also changed. She stopped trying to manage outcomes. She stopped treating relationships like problems to solve. The process was slow, but it was real. 6 months later, Ryan invited me to meet him at a small park overlooking the river where we had spent one of our earliest dates. The evening was beautiful. The water reflected the golden light of sunset. He smiled when he saw me approaching. Not the nervous smile of a man planning a proposal. The peaceful smile of someone who had finally learned patience. We sat on a bench and watched the river for a long time. Then he reached for my hand. "Whatever happens next," he said, "I want it to be built on truth." I smiled. That is all I ever wanted. We did not discuss wedding dates. We did not make promises about the future. Instead, we chose something stronger. We chose honesty. Looking back now, I understand that forgetting my coat was never the real story. The real story was discovering the courage to stop a life-changing decision when something felt wrong. Sometimes love means moving forward. Sometimes love means waiting. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is walk away from a wedding in order to protect the possibility of a healthier future. I did not lose a husband that day. I saved my future.